The announcement last week, to be honest, was probably the most exciting announcement in my entire junior mining career. We were quite happy. These kinds of deposits, like we have with Crawford, have a very distinct geophysical footprint.
A lot of viewers tuning in to this edition of Assay TV. I'm catching up with Canada Nickel today, who are advancing the next generation of high-quality, large-scale nickel projects in a secure Canadian jurisdiction in Ontario. I'm delighted to be speaking with Mark Selby, of course, who is the chairman, CEO, and director of the company. Good to speak with you today, Mark.
Great to speak with you as well, Adam.
So all eyes have been on your Crawford Nickel Sulphide Project. You've had a series of announcements in recent weeks updating on the metallurgy and the improvements in recovery there. Could you start with updating us on that?
Sure. So again, Crawford's brand new nickel sulphide discovery. We're just over 2 years in since the first drilling. We completed a PEA last May, and we're on track to deliver a feasibility study by this time next year. And a key component of that feasibility study update is going to be around improvements in the recovery. We had because we're moving fairly aggressively, we had only had a less than a year's worth of work before we locked in the flow sheet for the PEA. We were targeting a 4 to 5 percentage point improvement in recoveries, and again, with the project of the scale that we have, we would each of those points of improvement is worth $90 million NPV. So in total, it's a fairly large improvement, and we've been very, very happy. So we put out an initial set of results based on more of the kind of grade that we would be mining in the first 5 years, and we got anywhere from a 6 to 16% improvement in nickel recovery. And then last week we put out one on a lower grade sample, which would more similar with what we would be processing in the lower grade parts of our ore body, and again, got another very substantial improvement in recoveries in that range. And so, again, right now it's going to be 4 to 5 point improvement, still targeting, but it looks like there's some pretty substantial upside, in those numbers. And again, at $90 million point on a project that had a 1.2 billion NPV, it's a very material step change in terms of what the value of the project is going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. One other improvement that goes alongside that was within your East Zone. There was a discovery of a higher grade core, I believe. What does that also mean for defining this resource and the project bottom line as well?
Yeah, no, again, we were very, very happy. One of the other major improvements that we're targeting between the PEA and the feasibility study is a 50 to 100% increase in the overall resource that'll be utilized in the feasibility study. The PEA was based on drilling up to hole 65. Today we're up to hole 183. So there's a substantial amount of drilling that's going to be incorporated in the resource. And the East Zone is one of the key areas that we've been focused on. And again, the results we put out, we're targeting a 2 to 3x or more increase in the resource base in the East Zone, and we're pleasantly surprised that we uncovered this higher grade core, similar to what we have in our main zone. It just doesn't start right at surface, and some of our prior drilling hadn't hit it, but across a good chunk of the strike length of that East Zone is this nice higher grade core material. The advantage of that in an open pit operation is you've got some higher grade core closer to the center line of your open pit. It really improves the overall economics. So we're more than well on track to be able to deliver the resource, 50 to 100% increase in resource we're expecting, and the average value of it should also go up with this higher grade core that we unlocked.
Excellent. So a few weeks ago, there was an announcement around the Timmins district that you've actually scaled up the opportunity there by acquiring new targets, 13 of them, in fact. Could you talk us through how you did this, what you acquired, and also one of the terms you've described of them being uncoveries? What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, no, the announcement last week, to be honest, was probably the most exciting announcement in my entire junior mining career. We were quite happy. These kinds of deposits, like we have with Crawford, have a very distinct geophysical footprint. And so we had initially acquired another 5 targets in the region from Noble Mineral Exploration, who we had initially acquired Crawford from. And what was clear to us with some of the initial step out drilling with that, what we've seen at Crawford, that we've got a pretty good view of how the geophysics works with these types of deposits in the area. And so our VP Exploration, Steve Balch, who's a geophysicist by background, took a lot of the regional data that's available and basically tuned it out so that the type of ultramafic nickel deposit that we're looking for is really the only thing that lights up. And so he identified a bunch of targets, and what was very exciting was, for every one of the targets we had, with only 2 exceptions, they had some historical work that really indicated that they're the very similar deposit to what we have at Crawford. Crawford on its own is already the largest single nickel discovery since the early 1970s. We've got a couple million tons of contained nickel in a geophysical footprint that's just under a square kilometer. We picked up 37 square kilometers of an additional ultramafic footprint, so 40 times that kind of footprint. And so if you look around the world, there's only about a half dozen regions that supply the bulk of the world's nickel. So sometimes you get one-off discoveries. Voisey's Bay was a one-off, effectively. Nova Bollinger has effectively been a one-off nickel discovery, but then you also get discovery in clusters. The 3 largest nickel sulfide resources in Western Australia are all within 30 kilometers of each other, and all were discovered in the late 60s, early 70s. What we think we have now uncovered in Timmins is going to look like that region of Western Australia or northern Siberia or another bunch of places where you get these clusters of nickel deposits. And so we think we're on track to eventually be the largest nickel sulfide discovery ever in this region. In terms of the term uncoveries, what was very exciting for us, and again sort of gave us a lot of confidence that our targeting approach was great, was again, the Ontario Geological Survey, logs, has databases of all the historical work that's been done on the property. And so we were able to go back into that work was done in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. When, again, this type of ultramafic nickel, a 0.3 nickel, the economics just didn't work because you didn't have the kind of scale of mining equipment and so forth. And to figure out the metallurgy, which we've done in the last 20 years, to be able to look at these, and then all of a sudden, when you start looking at them with this ultramafic nickel lens, you get all of these great things. So we picked up one deposit from Glencore that had a small higher grade resource attached to it, but it was very clear. It's attached to a several kilometer long structure that's not dissimilar, from our east zone, that's going to end up being a very large deposit. There was another couple of targets, one Deloro at 299 meters at 0.28, with a much higher grade interval along with PGMs, in the midst of that, and they only had drilled, halfway through the anomaly. So, what we, again, and we found that in another 5 deposits where they'd either delineated the right type of mineralization over a very large area, or had some pretty spectacular drill intersections that, if we had announced it as a quote put that hole out as a new discovery today, we think would have a meaningful impact on share price. So to be able to, pop 6 of them out in one announcement is pretty exciting. So, the point I'm making is, if you look at generations of nickel supply, they all have 2 characteristics in common. One is you have a new approach to an existing resource, and you've got a big new source of demand that requires a certain kind of nickel. So, everyone looks back and knows Sudbury and must thought, oh, it must have been super exciting at the time. The trouble was people couldn't figure out how to separate nickel from copper. So they actually mostly sat there for 20 years until Inco came along and figured out how to separate them. 20 years later, Inco was a Dow Jones 30 company, which had stayed there for quite a period of time. And then the other analogy is Qingshan in the early 2000s. The old sulfide deposits couldn't keep pace with the amount of nickel that China needed. And Tsingshan realized, there's a huge amount of laterite ore in eastern Sulawesi in Indonesia. Inco drilled that off in the 60s and 70s for the most part. And Tsingshan just took a new view on an existing resource that said, wait a minute, this is a great way to make stainless steel. Chinese stainless needed lots of stainless steel. And so Tsingshan went from being a very tiny regional player to being the world's largest nickel producer and the world's largest stainless producer in just 15 years. We think, what we've done here in terms of taking this new ultramafic view on all these targets and the scale of the targets that we've just unlocked, we think we're going to be the leader of the next generation of nickel supply. Because one of the key characteristics of these ultramafic nickel deposits is the tailings and waste rock spontaneously absorb CO2. They're made up of a mineral which, when exposed to air, spontaneously absorbs CO2. And so, we think the market, EVs need lots of nickel. They'd like it as low a carbon as possible. And so, where we're sitting in a bunch of hydroelectric power, with tailings and waste rock that eat CO2, make us ideally positioned to be, one of the suppliers to the EV market going forward.
I just wanted to explain, this is the sort of the nickel district that you've described hiding in plain sight. What's the strategy to unlock it from here, and what are the key milestones that the investors can expect as we look into the early part of next year?
Yeah, so the key thing here is, again, I'm not going to blow my brains out drilling at this point until, our share price really reflects the underlying value of just Crawford in the share price. But what we are going to do is in a very careful, measured way, start to step out around these targets and really highlight the exploration and resource potential there. Because from a value perspective, when you look at when projects get acquired, if you have a good, world, tier one base metal asset, those tend to trade out at between 0.8 and 1 times the project NAV. If you have one of those with some very demonstrated resource potential, you can see those kind of projects go out for 1.2 to 1.5 times NAV. And so, what we want to be able to do is have, just clearly demonstrated the scale of what we've got, so that we can, potentially, if an acquirer comes through, hopefully trade up to that kind of a range as opposed to the lower end of the range. And the nice thing with these large disseminated ore bodies is you don't need, to do a lot of drilling to clearly delineate, what kind of material is there. So.
Fantastic. Okay, just to update viewers quickly on the company financials, you're well funded at the moment, and you've got the capital in place to execute on this further exploration.
Yeah, so we raised money last summer to take us through until the first quarter. We also announced that we were in discussions with strategic investors, and so we expect that process to wrap up shortly here, and that'll keep us well funded through feasibility study, and then we'll take it from there.
Excellent stuff. All right, Mark, thanks very much for sharing an update. It's really exciting stuff and a great year for Canada Nickel. So we look forward to catching up in early 2022 for an update on how the exploration is going.
Yep, most definitely. No, I think it's going to be 2021 was an exciting year. I think 2022 is going to even be an even more exciting one. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, certainly.